Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Laureen Zarba, and I'm here to introduce Matt DeFanis. The webinar is offered in co-sponsorship with the New York State Association of Realtors. And here we go. Hailing from the cornfields of central Illinois, Matt has become an improbable fair housing and DEI evangelist. Matt is broker owner of Remax Realty Associates with offices in Champaign-Urbana area. Matt served as the 2018 president of the Illinois Realtors. It was during his time on that leadership team that his DEI journey began, as he became aware of the persistent lack of diversity in industry leadership roles. He's committed to addressing this problem despite having no roadmap for doing so. In following years, Matt became accustomed to being the only white guy in a lot of rooms on the south side of Chicago, which is where many of the most transformative friendships developed. Matt has since won numerous awards for his work to improve fair housing inclusion in the industry. Matt served as the 2020 chair of the National Association of Realtors Professional Standards Committee, where he ended up leading the charge to revise and expand the code of ethics to ban discriminatory hate speech, which is supposed to be a relatively quiet volunteer role, landed Matt in the New York Times and numerous other media outlets. In just the last month, Matt has prominently featured in the Bloomberg Business Week article, appeared live on Bloomberg Quick Take, and was the exclusive guest for an full hour of the Tavis Smiley Show on Los Angeles KBLA. Matt earned his bachelor's degree in psychology and his Juris Doctor at the University of Illinois. Matt's wife, Angela, is a Filipino immigrant and nurse practitioner. Their kids, Gabe and Belle, are in high school and have been along for much of Matt's journey. On Sunday mornings, Matt can be found on the tech booth at Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church, where he runs the sound system and the live stream for his Black church. He has also volunteered at the local temple, helping to live stream the last 2 years of Jewish high holidays. With that, I welcome and turn it over to Matt.
Thank you so much, Laureen, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back with LIBOR. So I want to give you everyone a little bit of an orientation to what I'm dealing with here. So the Chicago Association of Realtors, which has adopted me, I'm 130 miles south of there, but I'm a secondary member and I had to be in the city for other stuff, and they set me up in a conference room. So I'm coming to you from my mobile studio. I'm looking at my slide deck over here. I'm looking at my Zoom window here. I am watching the chat box. I should have plenty of time to be able to have conversation and be interactive. The prepared content that I'm going to have is probably going to run maybe 35 minutes or so, but the most important parts of this are often going to be the interaction. The presentation I'm going to talk with you about is one that I had just recently prepared, and actually your CEO, Tessa, had asked me to use that material that I prepared for the NAR Association Executive Institute in Seattle a few weeks ago. So we're going to talk about bridging the gap. A lot of what I've talked about in other presentations, including at LIBOR, has to do with the history of fair housing. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, but we're also going to focus on looking forward to how do we actually take steps for bridging the gap. When I did this the first time, it was aimed at association executives and staffers. The material all applies to all of us in the industry. Some of it will apply to from a recruiting standpoint. So obviously, if you are a realtor principal, if you are a leader of a firm, it applies to you. If you're a team leader, though, it applies to you. If you're an aspiring team leader, it applies to you. And then much of it will be applicable even if you are simply a standalone agent. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start running through my slides. Do feel free to interrupt me. The chat box is here where I can see it, but feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions that are context sensitive. And with that, let's see if I can get my slide deck rolling. So a little bit of history, because we can't really talk about how to bridge the gap if we don't give some explanation as to where the gap came from. And the very short answer is we created the gap. Now, we weren't the only actors, and when I say we, I mean realtors. We were not the only actors, but we created the gap. The Code of Ethics, and I had the privilege of serving as the 2020 chair of the National Association of Realtors Professional Standards Committee. So it was not lost on me that my predecessor, the person that sat in that same chair presiding over that same committee decades earlier, had seen fit to advance a motion that added this to the Code of Ethics. A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in the neighborhood. Now, hopefully in 2023, we all look at this and think, well, it's morally repugnant, of course, but this was premised on this idea that if you bring the wrong people, the wrong type of people, the wrong color of people, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong religion, that you're gonna tank property values. And the sad fact is our entire industry and much of our society continues to operate on that same premise. A quick look at what redlining looked like. The Homeowners Loan Corporation redlining maps, which were promulgated in the FDR New Deal era, so 30s and 1940-ish. And these were promulgated by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was a government-sponsored enterprise. And I don't want to come into your market and impugn your market, so I'm going to impugn mine. So I use this part of Chicago as my best and most tragic example, but this stuff exists everywhere in the entire country. This is a portion of Chicago that today would be called Bronzeville, a neighborhood named after the color of the residents' skin. And if you were standing at McCormick Place along Chicago's lakefront looking south, McCormick Place is the North America's largest convention center. This is the area you're looking into. This got shaded red, and in so doing, it cut off the mainstream money supply to residents there. And in any redline neighborhood, based on the color of the skin of the people who lived there, if it got shaded red, the money supply was cut off. Here's what the margin note said for that tract in the city of Chicago. The new housing project has the realtors guessing as to what the ultimate result will be when so many of this race are drawn into this section from the already Negro-blighted district. With approximately 6,500 colored people moving into the district, it's evident they cannot be closed in. They must have an outlet. And the problem of keeping park and water frontage close by reasonably free of them will be difficult to surmount. The trend of the colored people will now be accelerated toward the park and water frontage, which many people consider could have been avoided had it been located west of Indiana. It's believed, particularly since the advent of this housing project, that the entire section will ultimately go colored, which will increase the number of colored people using the lakefront. Washington Park, which is shown here in this sketch, being enjoyed by white women and girls in lacy dresses. Washington Park is already doomed. Everywhere in the country, we had Black Americans, in this case Black Chicagoans, described in terms that would be analogous to an infestation of sewer rats. And when you see that this was a product of the Homeowners Loan Corporation, you would think, well, it was government bureaucrats that wrote that. No, it was realtors and appraisers who wrote that and who drew the red lines, and in so doing determined who got access to money and who was just cut off and trapped. My mom is a Southern Baptist preacher's daughter from Mississippi, and my dad is an Italian Catholic Southsider from the city of Chicago. So naturally, they're divorced. I didn't know, even though I've had the chance to study a lot of the civil rights movement in the South, I didn't know until just a few years ago that Dr. Martin Luther King moved his entire family to the city of Chicago in summer of 1966. And the sole purpose for moving his family to the city of Chicago was to shine a very bright and uncomfortable spotlight on the deplorable housing conditions that Black Chicagoans were trapped in. And by the 1960s, the city of Chicago, just the city proper, had a million Black residents. The Black population here would have already been one of the largest cities in the United States. Dr. King said at one of the gatherings, one of the rallies that he hosted here in Chicago, I've been in many demonstrations all across the South, but I can say I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and hate-filled as I have seen here in Chicago. This is Dr. King trying to get back to his feet after he was hit in the head with a fist-sized rock. The fist-sized rock was thrown at him by a member of the white mob, and the destination of that march was a real estate office. This is not the Jim Crow South. This was Chicago, Illinois, during the 1960s, and this was over the idea of the then public policy debate over the possibility of fair housing, which the National Association of Realtors and our entire industry vociferously opposed. So fair housing proposals during the height of the civil rights movement were percolating around municipal city councils, county boards, state legislatures, and the United States Congress. And organized real estate was all in against. In fact, this comes right out of NAR's archives. We were equipping our state and local volunteer leaders with propaganda kits, with everything a volunteer association leader could need to oppose fair housing at every step of the way. Euphemistically, it was referred to as forced housing, i.e., you can't force me to sell my house to those people. Nevertheless, we were unsuccessful. In 1968, President Johnson signed into law the Fair Housing Act. However, the Fair Housing Act had been bottled up in Congress and had not had a prayer of making it to the president's desk, in part because of the massive lobbying efforts that organized real estate had against it. Ultimately, it passed because of the untimely death of Dr. King. Right after the assassin's bullet tore through his body, Congress suddenly found the political will it had been lacking, and President Johnson signed it into law 7 days after Dr. King died. It would not have passed but for his untimely death, so it's not an overstatement to say that the Fair Housing Act is in fact a posthumous accomplishment of Dr. King. So this is my friend Frank Williams. He is one of only a handful of Black past presidents of the Chicago Association of Realtors. He's a past Realtist, that's the Black Real Estate Trade Group, past Realtist leader. He's a past NAACP leader. And Frank is a good friend of mine. He is still active here in Chicago, and as evidence that passing the Fair Housing Act in 1968 didn't solve all of our fair housing problems, Frank's house was firebombed for selling real estate while Black here in Chicago when he was in 1975, so 7 years after the advent of supposedly fair housing. In fact, speaking of slow progress, the final vestiges of the discriminatory language that I shared with you from our Code of Ethics weren't eradicated entirely until 1974. The realtors were all in against fair housing, and when it passed in spite of them, it took another 6 years for the Code of Ethics to be updated to reflect the bare minimum of what federal law had required for 6 years. So Frank had several strikes against him. Frank was selling real estate while Black. Frank was selling real estate to Black people. Frank was selling real estate to Black people in the Beverly neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, which at that time was overwhelmingly white. And Frank was also doing this while married to a white woman. In fact, he got himself kicked out of high school in Flint, Michigan for dating a white girl. They've been married now for 60 plus years. So Frank's house was firebombed. A Molotov cocktail was detonated on his front porch while most of his family was at home. But besides that incendiary act of terrorism, the lengths to which people went to try to ruin his business were pretty spectacular. Back in the olden days, if you're younger than me, realtors depended upon landline telephones. They would either hang on people's walls or sit on their desks, and they had cords attached to them. And realtors depended on those as their business lifeline. Frank had neighborhood white women organizing, banding together to call his business line all day long to make it impossible for Frank to conduct business by telephone. The harassment went on for years. This is my professional other half, Missy, and I just last year, we did an oral history of Frank, did a sit-down interview as a past Dearborn Realtist leader. So as I had the chance, only in the last few years, the chance to learn the history of housing discrimination, it's layer upon layer upon layer of terrible, depressing, god-awful stuff that we as an industry have inflicted upon historically marginalized communities. But it's awful, but it's hard to quantify it. But a study here in Chicago did just that just a few years ago in 2019 called The Plunder of Black Wealth in Chicago. And this was a widely peer-reviewed study that was published in a lot of different journalistic outlets. So for context, we're looking at this World War II, post-World War II era. During that era, from 1940 to 1960, the homeownership rate in the United States skyrocketed. It went from 43 to 62%. White Americans had easy access to low-cost, low interest government-backed loans. Remember I said that when we drew the red lines, we cut off the money supply to neighborhoods based on where Black and brown people lived. At the same time, we made easy money available, but only if you were white, only if you were white. Even if the developer wasn't a racist, no development in these burgeoning white suburbs, no development could be FHA or VA insured unless it had racially restrictive covenants. So we trapped the Black and brown people in the red line neighborhoods and cut off the money supply while we were making low-cost, brand new housing easily and affordably available to white people. So this forced Black people into this unregulated market of contract sales, which accounted for between 75 and 95% of sales to Black people. The markup, so as a law school graduate, one of the appalling things about this is an utter lack of due process. For those of you who have lived and worked long enough in real estate to have dealt with a short sale or a foreclosure, you know that those erode our will to live because they take forever. And that's because we're being due processed to death. These didn't have any due process. You miss a payment, you're out of the house, you don't have any equity, you're just gone. The price markup was 84%. In 2019 inflation-adjusted dollars, that equated to an extra $587 per month. Over just the 2 decades study, this is one city, one segment, one generation. This is Chicago, Black population, 50s and 60s. The cost of housing discrimination inflicted on this segment of our population was pegged at between $3.2 and $4 billion. Understanding inflation has adjusted up since 2019. If we take that 4 billion number, to contextualize that, that would be the equivalent of stealing a $40,000 college scholarship fund from 100,000 separate college-bound Black students in one city, in one generation. That hangover effect, of course, stretches and ripples through the generations that followed. And it wasn't until I got to learn this history that I look back at the diverse public high school that I graduated from and now can realize why people that didn't look like me would not have had anywhere near the level of certainty about their future access to college. If you're here in this session, you're presumably here on purpose. You probably already care about fair housing and equity issues. But I will tell you, I need you to tell your friends. And I need you to be evangelists to your friends because there's a lot of people that are not on board with you yet. We still have people that are saying, why is this my problem? I didn't break it. All that terrible stuff that I just spent the last few minutes discussing, I didn't do it. I didn't create it. Not my fault, not my problem. And author Isabel Wilkerson actually has a very direct response to that. In fact, one of the association executives right before the session that I did at AEI a few weeks ago told me right before we went into session that one of her members said, why is this my problem? I didn't own slaves. That is what Isabel Wilkerson addresses head on. We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that's beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations. Cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We're the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We didn't erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they're ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. Unaddressed, the ruptures and diagonal cracks will not fix themselves. The toxins will not go away, but rather will spread, leach, and mutate as they already have. When people live in an old house, they come to adjust to the idiosyncrasies and outright dangers skulking in an old structure. They put buckets under a wet ceiling, prop up groaning floors, learn to step over that rotting wood tread in the staircase. The awkward becomes acceptable and the unacceptable becomes merely inconvenient. Live with it long enough and the unthinkable becomes normal. Exposed over the generations, we learn to believe that the incomprehensible is the way life is supposed to be. We're going to spend most of the rest of our time together looking forward, but there are countless examples of how and why this still happens. And it's important that all of us, and I'm telling you, I'm going to let you all in on a secret. I'm white. I've been white a very long time. I have a lot of experience being white. I'm quite good at it. It was a birthday gift. And this stuff doesn't happen in front of me. It still doesn't. I have never willfully worn blinders, but this stuff does not happen in front of me, which means my own senses are telling me erroneously that housing discrimination is not still happening, when in fact I know, because of myriad transformative friendships, that it is. It's happening everywhere. And we all owe a duty to just recognize this isn't the way life is supposed to be. This is not okay. This is not acceptable. And in fact, we do all own it. We are all members of an industry that has a terrible legacy of inflicting harm on large swaths of our society. So I'm going to talk about two primary ways to look at bridging the gap. One of them is we got to use the realtors that we have. Those of you that are here and all of your friends and colleagues who are already in the industry, all of us have to be equipped and ready to proactively go bridge the gap and find inroads to historically marginalized communities. Now, having said that, we are very white as an industry everywhere. This is not a LIBOR issue. This is not an Illinois or a Chicago issue. This is everywhere in the country. The realtor population, the rank and file, always underrepresents historically marginalized populations and communities of color. And I'll talk about that. That's the Sarah Ware theorem. Sarah is one of my best friends and is the current president and second ever Black female president of the Chicago Association of Realtors. And Sarah had told me in a conversation just a couple of years ago, she said, you know, it is a privilege to be able to be involved in this volunteer leadership. Like that costs something. You have to have the time to go do that. And who could afford to go do that? People who already are comfortably at financial critical mass. The flip side question is, so who can't afford to do that? People who are not already at financial critical mass. And disproportionately, those are going to be members that are coming from historically marginalized backgrounds. The rigors of self-employment, the upfront costs of getting in, that tends to disproportionately screen out people who are young, single income, or from any sort of historically marginalized background. So our rank and file membership is wider than the overall populace that we serve, and our volunteer leadership ranks are even wider yet. It's just important to be aware of that. Again, it's not something that we're readily going to fix. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. It's not because it's part of an evil plot, but it is something important to be aware of. This was the Illinois Realtors Board of Directors in 2017. 2017. And there I am as president-elect that year, right there in the front row. None of this was on my radar at all. And of course, I look back on this just a few short years ago, and besides lamenting that I was thinner and younger, I look at that and think, how on earth could I not have been aware of who we were leaving out here? This was the entire board of directors representing 50,000 Realtor members in the great state of Illinois, including, of course, the city of Chicago. And we were 100% white, 100%. And 68% male in an industry that is 2/3 female. And then in this even more glaring example of tone deafness for the class picture, let's put all the white people in white shirts. This was not on my radar at all until just a few years ago, but this is very typical. A lot of associations still have leadership that looks like this. I am going to see if I can I'm going to briefly see if I can get my screen share audio to go. So let's see, here we go. I'm going to turn on a setting and pray for a moment. This is my friend Vicky Silvano. Vicky is a former ARIA, Asian Real Estate Association of America national president in 2016. She's a friend of mine. She's from the Chicagoland area. This was Vicky at my installation as the 2018 Illinois Realtors president. And at my installation, I had just in those last couple of years become aware of our glaring lack of inclusion of this gap that I'm here to talk about, and became pretty obsessed with trying to fix it. These were Vicky's unscripted remarks during her moment at the podium during my inaugural.
It is very historic for you to bring us here together. Historic because it's the first time that the Realtor family has included us. There is strength in diversity.
Vicky was choking up and was in tears. And her words, it was the first time that the Realtors had included us. I had white people furious. I had white people complaining, that's a lie. That's a lie. And had the Illinois Realtors or any other Realtor association put a sign on the door that said Asians aren't welcome? No, of course not. But a moment like that indicates that we might as well have. Everything we do has to look very, very critically at who are we leaving out? Who's not here that should be? Not because we want to check a box, not because we need a token. We need them and their perspectives and their differences way more than they need us. But that was this moment where it just illustrated when I got the complaints that people were still thinking, well, no, we're not doing anything. There's nothing exclusionary going on. But clearly, that's not how it felt. It was when Vicki said it was the first time. It was the first time that it was clear you are expected to be here. We need you. There is a table for you. There is a place here, and I need you. We need you to be here. So as I said, we're going to talk about two different key ways broadly to try to bridge the gap. We got to equip the realtors that we have and the ones that are here right now to serve historically marginalized communities, but we also have to be mindful of recruiting realtors from those historically marginalized communities. We're all capitalists, probably. Most of us are commission-based. Most of us are self-employed. Realtors are a fascinating bunch on a lot of levels, but we are small L libertarian. We like our autonomy. We don't like being told what to do. We don't like having a boss. And we work like our paychecks depend upon it because they do. But when we're paid on commission, it also means that we can have some unintended consequences. It's tough to tell realtors, help bridge the gap by working twice as hard on deals that are going to pay you half as much money. And realistically, a lot of times that's exactly what that requires. It requires going out of our way to make sure that we're doing outreach in any historically marginalized community. And any historically marginalized community will be one where the homeownership rate is much lower, where it is the exception, not the rule, where people have not had financial literacy modeled for them, where the complications are multitudinous. You're frequently dealing with people in the gig economy who are cobbling together numerous gig economy income sources, DoorDash, Uber, Lyft. And as you all know, that's not easy qualifying income. It takes a history of that. And if we're going to get that type of client to the closing table, we're going to work with them for a long time. And we're going to have to find a really good patient lender. And chances are they're probably buying something that's below the median value. And if you're somebody lucky enough to work with an affluent clientele, literally you will get paid less than half the money for twice the work if we're looking solely at the commission dollars. So we just need to be aware that that's one of the natures of the financial incentives in the world that we live and work in. When it comes to mortgages, it's important to recognize, of course, most of our lenders are commission-based as well, and so we have the same thing that applies to them. That's not a bad thing, but it does mean that the bankers, the lenders that we need to connect with these folks from historically marginalized communities often aren't going to be the ones that are at the top of our mind. And I'll tell you, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a multi-office broker owner, and I have a financial partner who is a full-time mortgage lender. Same thing, commission-based and access to lots of different programs, but that won't always be the right person for this type of client. Community bankers tend to have heavy salary-based, either 100% salary or primarily base salary. They're not having to chase commissions. If you're lucky enough to have a stack of clients and you're chasing the commissions, doing loan programs that are 2 and 3 times as complicated and require multiple layers of underwriting and a separate government-backed insurance step on top of the regular underwriting, that becomes a very tough sell. Community bankers are there to do just that. In many places, those community banker positions really pretty much exist to shovel money out the door to the people we are here to help today. So make sure that you're looking for those people, and also understand, because those community bankers may not be the ones that are writing large sponsorship checks to your associations. They may not always be the ones that are showing up at trade shows or that are flagship sponsors for educational events. But just know, things that I've learned only in the last several weeks, Section 8 housing vouchers can be qualifying income for a mortgage. SSI disability can be qualifying income in that household when it's being collected by a child with a disability. There's all sorts of creative ways to take benefits, fixed income benefits that people already are getting like clockwork, and leverage that to turn people into homeowners. There are a great many people who are already capable, as long as you can connect the dots. And then, of course, many others who are going to need longer term care and coaching when it comes to getting their credit to where it needs to be. As we try to focus proactively on recruiting people from those historically marginalized backgrounds, but folks from brown and black communities, we have to be aware of those pitfalls. And I can tell you, not only from experience watching how this works at the association level, at the local, state, and national association level, but I can tell you as an individual business owner, as somebody who has for years now had a very intense focus on hiring people from historically marginalized backgrounds, the washout rate will be higher. By definition, if somebody's coming from a marginalized background, what they lack is margin. They don't have a lot of financial margin. They don't have a big support system. They don't have a safety net. They're also more likely to end up with a health issue, and more likely, in my experience, more likely to find that before they've banked a bunch of paid days off, they have to miss work for something that's out of their control, a sick kid, or their own health issue that they have to take care of. I'll tell you, speaking candidly, that when I have been proactively hiring talent from historically marginalized communities, the turnover rate has absolutely been higher. And every time that happens, it ends up costing me money. And that makes me no less committed to doing it. It needs to be done. We have to be doing this. But I want to prep you all for the fact that when you're doing it, you need to not be discouraged when you realize that you're going to end up with some challenges. Because if you don't go into it understanding that and recognizing that the people that we're trying to recruit and the talent that we desperately need, and the talent is amazing. But if the washout rate seems higher than average, higher than when you're hiring from the affluent white establishment, it becomes very easy to confirm a stereotype. Well, I thought I was going to try to hire from this pool and it just confirmed they're just not as qualified. No, they just didn't have as many tailwinds and faced a lot of headwinds that a lot of folks don't. So just be mindful of that and know that we're going to also have to be ready to not just find out, not just go out of our way to recruit, not just go out of our way to make sure we put a job application in someone's hands. Don't just go out of our way to get them recruited to the pre-license class. Recognize that we have all of these other hurdles, all of these upfront expenses from people that don't have a lot of money in the bank and don't have a lot of emergency savings in an industry that we all know all too well is going to cost money before it makes money. So ways to mitigate those heightened washout risks. My professional other half, Missy, who was in that photo several slides ago, she moved from the south side of Chicago, the tract that I actually showed you in the redlining map about 14 months ago. I created a position that was basically my professional other half and a community outreach liaison, specifically focused on building bridges to Black and Brown communities. And she's been absolutely amazing and life-changing. And we'll switch over to a self-employed role. But for all of the reasons that I just mentioned, she wouldn't have been able to do that. She wouldn't have been able to deal with the upfront starting expenses or relocate to a different part of the state, but for the fact that it was a position that eased the transition into it. And as I said, she will be shifted to a self-employed role and will absolutely join the ranks of the self-employed entrepreneurs. But I don't know that she would have had the chance to do it if there weren't a way in, and the talent is just stratospheric. It's just out of this world. And we've got to be focusing on how do we get those bridges built to ease that talent into the industry when we know all too well there's so many barriers to it. So I'm going to finish my prepared remarks with sort of my top 10 list. Look for partnerships to get your association, to get you as an individual practitioner or your team or your firm into brown and Black spaces. The word partnerships here is intentional. Don't throw money at it. Don't sponsor something. Don't just show up at the fancy gala. Find ways to partner with organizations and meaningfully be in Black and brown spaces. Also, be ready to be uncomfortable. If you look like me, be ready to be the outlier. And by the way, that's what a lot of the people that are coming from these communities, when they're in realtor land, that's what they have to deal with. They're the only one. Be ready to deal with that and get used to it. Don't lean too hard on the existing and very scarce supply of historically marginalized folks that we have. One of the things that we tend to do in our industry is we don't have, as I already said earlier, we don't have anywhere near a proportionate share of people that are coming from Black and brown communities in the ranks of realtors. And then the ones that we get, there's a very, very scarce supply of them that we get at volunteer leadership levels. And then out of that very, very scarce supply, where do we tend to stack them? Oh yeah, fair housing, equal opportunity. Well, then that makes things like professional standards even whiter. And we don't need professional standards to be any whiter than it already is. I can tell you, being in professional standards. So make sure that we're not overtaxing the scarce Black and brown populations that we already have. And then, to be very blunt, they don't have the time or the mental bandwidth to be one more white person's one Black friend. And I'm telling you, you're going to have Black people who say, I love where your heart is at. I love the direction it's aiming. I love that you're genuine and authentic and you want to learn more. All of that is good, but I don't have time to be one more white person's one Black friend. Be sure that all your online and social media photo galleries showcase inclusion. If you've got an all-white team, and many of us do, if you've got an all-white team, that is what it is. But make sure that if you're showcasing pictures of people, if you're out in the community, make sure you're intentionally and proactively representing everybody. Because if you walk out of our session today and you come from an all-white or nearly all-white office or team or work environment, and you decide, yeah, I'm committed to making sure that I recruit people that don't look like me, well, the first problem you're going to run into is you try having that conversation, they go on your Facebook page or they'll go on your business website. Well, you don't look like an organization or you don't look like a team that wants people that look like me. So even when you're ready and excited to do the recruiting, you don't want to find out that you've discouraged those recruits before you've ever started because they went and did their due diligence and already decided for themselves, this is not a place that looks or feels welcoming to me. Get the word out. Do your research. Connect with those community bankers. Find out what those programs are that are existing in your market and get the word out. Partner with mortgage originators. Do home ownership seminars and fairs, showcase the free money that is out there. There is a ton of money. We just need to be the connectors that get those members of the buying public connected with the resources. Obviously, as I said, not all of them are going to overnight be ready to buy, but there are some, quite a few, who really are. The credit worthiness is there. As soon as they get connected with the right down payment grant program, they're in business and ready to go. Host lunch and learn events or summits that bring together other people that are already doing work to bridge the gap. Find other organizations that maybe aren't even real estate organizations that are catering to whatever types of historically marginalized populations are in your geographic area that would make sense for you to cater to. Offer minority scholarships. Now, this is at the association level. But you can do this at the firm or at the team level. Offer to cover, create an objective application process and scholarship somebody's pre-license coursework. Just remember, getting them a scholarship through the pre-license course doesn't erase any of the multitudinous barriers that still exist after that in terms of upfront fees that confront new members. Think creatively about licensed positions that can be hybridized somehow. Talked about missing my professional other half. Find a way to get people in where there is some sort of base salary. There are opportunities. If you're doing what you should be doing to screen for the talent, and you know the person is high detail, and you know the person has the potential almost from day one to extend your own reach as a practitioner and to let you do more with less, to let you conduct more business, you can absolutely, in many cases, if you're high producing, if you're successful, you can afford to start letting a base salary go out the door and still find that it's profitable very, very quickly. But just think creatively. How can you break down those barriers? And it doesn't mean you necessarily have to have an army of employee licensees, but come up with some sort of a bridge that helps them get there so that you can then really get the benefit of unleashing that talent that's out there, but effectively locked out of the industry because of the natural barriers that exist currently. Do community outreach. White people, you got to get comfortable being immersed, and I mean immersed in brown and Black spaces, and that's going to take time. I am uncomfortable proof. My happy places are often Black spaces, but I was super uncomfortable at first. I was very, very aware that I didn't blend and that I was the only one in the room and that everyone was looking at me. Not only that, I have since learned that in my early time spent in some of these Black spaces, I've learned that I was on the receiving end of some implicit bias. I asked my friend Natika, what did you think the first time you saw me at Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church, where I'm not always the only white person, but I'm often the only white person? Natika's response, I thought you were running for office. There's no good, virtuous, altruistic reason that some strange white man just ends up at Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church. The most likely reason in their framework is, oh yeah, that's a white person running for office, and today is the day he needs Black people and Black votes. There's going to be presumptions made. There will be questions asked. The Dearborn Realtists, from whom I've won awards, for years thought I was a spy. Again, no good reason some white man would actually be here to truly want to serve. So, but you got to get past that. You just have to. My life is immeasurably and permanently changed and better because of the love I've been shown in exactly these sorts of spaces. Recognize there's no quick fixes. This is a long game. This is a long game. I've already told you, count on those short-term failures. Count on some money out the door while you're waiting to get exactly the right person. I have certainly had to do that. But man, getting the right person, the right people matched with their talents and firing on all cylinders is, it's like just watching an ongoing miracle. Be bold, but you got to be humble. I'm asking you to go to places you're not used to going. And when you go to those places, it's imperative that you be humble. It's imperative that you be ready to listen. And people who've known me for a lot of years, humility would not be anywhere in the, say, top 100 personality attributes that they would cite for me. And yet God himself has found lots of ways to humiliate me along the way, so I have become much more humble. But I'll tell you, like when I started going to this Black church, and I had several reasons I wanted to be in that space, but I mean, for weeks, I was just there. I didn't want to do anything that would look like I was on a conquest or trying to get involved too quickly or have people ask questions or assume anything bad. Just make sure you're humble and go into these places just ready to listen and learn for a while. Treat the showing up for some period of time on a recurring basis as just part of the orientation. So with that's the end of the prepared remarks, and we've still got about 15, 13 minutes together. I would love to watch the chat box if you are all in a position where you're able to use it. And I'm perfectly fine if people get promoted as panelists so I can actually hear your voices. But what would you like to talk about, or what questions do you have for me? And Ruth, thanks for the kind words earlier. I'm not averse to awkward silence, but a little interactivity would be lovely. What do you think?
It looks like we have someone raising their hand. Since this is a webinar, we can't have them speak, but if they want to type in the chat.
Yes, I'll need you to use the chat box. Yeah, and if you're willing to promote them to panelists, that's fine by me. If you're willing to promote people as they raise their hands, that'd be great.
Let's see.
Yeah, because we only got 18 people in this room. Yeah, so I see David, I see your hand up.
Here, David, we can let you talk.
Alice, thank you so much for that.
David, if you want to, we can let you talk if you want to. I'm hoping that's what this hand raise means. So you can ask your question. Here, we'll do that right now.
Hey, David, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go. Hey.
Yeah. Hi, Matt. Hello to everybody. Hi. I just wanted to first and foremost express that I thoroughly loved and enjoyed all that you have shared, because it is the truth. And if we can all look at it from this set of eyes as real estate brokers, agents, where God has created us all equally, and we are to love everybody as we love ourselves, and treat everybody as we want to be treated. There are whole lots of this, issues that is shared will be dealt with. But it is so wonderful the way you have shared it. I have sincerely enjoyed hearing what you shared, and I appreciate the truth that has come out. And thank you so much. I just wanted
Thank
to
you,
say
David. I so appreciate the kind words. I'll just tell, one of the questions that people will ask me is like, how did you get to be this way? And the short answer, there's of course long answers, but the short answer would be, I told you earlier, I never willfully have worn blinders, but this stuff doesn't, the housing discrimination, the challenges and the headwinds that people that don't look like me face, that's not visible. That doesn't manifest itself in front of me. I'm the beneficiary of transformative friendships. And I will never know what it's like to sell real estate while Black. But I've had a lot of Black and brown friends that have pulled back the curtain and given me a front row seat. And I've seen enough that even though it is not my lived experience and never will be, I can't unsee that. And I've been places that nobody that looks like me has been. And that's why I am this way. And there's also the sad realization along my journey that I won't live long enough to see the damage that we've inflicted as an industry undone. It's not possible for it to be undone in my lifetime. So the best that I can do is recruit friends and allies along the way to help do as much as we can do to undo that damage. I'm a white man from the cornfields of Central Illinois in front of an audience of one of the largest local associations in the country. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm here because of this very improbable journey, and the big upshot from that is don't underestimate your ability to be part of that change and to be part of the solution. There's nobody less likely than me to make a difference moving the needle on issues of housing discrimination and inclusion in our industry. And yet I've gotten numerous awards for doing exactly that. And that's not a me thing. That's just a reflection of the power of one person, no matter how improbably situated. So don't underestimate ever your individual ability to be part of making the world better, to be part of launching a snowball of generational wealth that will ripple across the generations in a family that has never had that before, because you were finding ways to proactively reach out as you tried to bridge that gap.
Right.
Mary Alice, did you want to say something? I see her hand is up.
All right. Let's see.
Let's see if we can get her promoted.
Thanks for your kind words, David. We're gonna
Thank you.
send
Thank
you
you
back
so much.
into the audience.
It's Mary Alice.
Sure. Let's see. Let's see.
Rupert.
Mary Alice, come on.
Hey, Mary Alice, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, you sound perfect.
Well, you kind of just touched on what I really wanted to ask. I've been so very, very involved in the association work over the last 4 years. I've been privileged to watch your work at the national level with 10-5 and what you have done to help move our association to a better place in terms of the national issue. And it's ironic in a meeting this morning where we were discussing the fact that, we are doing everything that our association can do to bring to light the challenges in housing and in so much of it being the unconscious aspect of the biases. And, I think the first thing is really to recognize that we all have them. We just all have them. It's part of our makeup. It's part of where we grew up and how we grew up, and all of those things is generational. And I guess I'm a little frustrated because I'm not seeing enough change locally. And like you said, you won't live long enough to see, the snowball effect. But, it was just such a crushing blow to have another Newsday article come out that our our membership is being featured in ways that just shouldn't be happening. It just
Right.
should be a little further along than we are in terms of how we're practicing this profession. These are people's lives. I wish I could tell every realtor, you need to embrace the fact that you are impacting lives.
Oh, yeah.
Just selling a
Basic
house.
human need. I mean, roofs over heads.
Yeah. And so if we could all look at it from that perspective, like you look at that next seller, that next buyer and say, all right, what's my impact going to be to your life? Maybe I would behave better. Maybe I would make some different decisions, but I'm so glad you're speaking today because I needed to hear your voice. I needed to watch your presentation again because I saw the one that you did for the AEs because we don't hear it enough. Like I said, if I could force every branch office of every company to have to mandatorily have each one of their agents sit for this presentation is so powerful and it's so relatable. I mean, really relatable. You recognize your Caucasianness and we are who we are, but we could do so much of a better job in what we do for a living.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Mary Alice. Thank you for being here. So, a couple of things. Sadly, of course, the Newsday Long Island Divided expose gets used, and I use bits of that in presentations all over the country. However, I am always very, very careful to say, don't you dare, in some other part of the country, don't you dare make the mistake of thinking, man, it sucks to be one of the bigots in Long Island. That is the result of implicit bias, unconscious bias at work. By definition, implicit bias, you don't have a consciously discriminatory thought in your head. With only one exception, where one of those real estate professionals was clearly using coded language. She knew what she was doing and she was just kind of coding over it. But for the most part, those realtors didn't know. They did not go to work intending to discriminate, didn't know they were doing it while they were doing it, and didn't realize they had done it when they had done it. It's important for us all to recognize we have implicit biases, and NAR now has some great tools for that. At the bare minimum, go Google NAR bias override and watch the free 50-minute video that explores the mind science of implicit bias at the intersection of real estate practice and gives you some tips for how to override stuff that our brains do behind the scenes, unconsciously, on autopilot, that result in wildly disparate treatment of different types of clients. Watch that. Take the 3 or 4 hour, depending on where you take it, NAR bias override certification. That's certified for CE in most jurisdictions. Go find that. That is sort of an extended play version that will get you CE and that takes a deeper dive into the mind science of implicit bias. But we all have it, and it's not bad. But we just need to be aware of it and understand how to avoid that disparate impact challenge. And then Alphonse asked a question, how do you think the leadership of our industry will continue to strive in eliminating the racism or biases in housing space against all odds or challenges? So here's the good news, folks. In the realtor ecosystem, DEI is not a fad. That is not a box that is getting checked. DEI with a meaningful focus on equity is here to stay. One of my friends at NAR, a staffer, used the word infrastructure to describe the fair housing and DEI elements that are now within NAR. Infrastructure. There are teams of positions that exist. It is something that goes way beyond any individual volunteer leader and is now part of the infrastructure. I saw numerous friends posting from the NAR budget meetings a week ago and a binder of the DEI game plan and the budget that goes with that. That is a pillar. It's not a silo. It's not out there on its own. It is now a pillar in the structural elements of our organization. So I'm very pleased to see that the realtor trade organizations, pretty much up and down, but certainly from NAR on down, are now very legitimately committed and are making tons of resources available. It is, it's not checking a box. It is really genuinely becoming who we are as an organization, who we would be. I want to respect everyone's time. I will stay on for a few minutes and we'll be happy to entertain other questions, but I want to get you all out on time. I cannot thank you enough for taking time to spend with me today. It's super important subject matter, and I need you to go out and make your world in your neck of the woods better. And please know that you absolutely have the power to do it, and I'm counting on you to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a couple more questions in the chat. I think if you have the time to answer them, Matt.
Yeah, so I'll just stay on and answer these out loud for people that are still hanging out here. So, how do I protect myself and help a buyer with disability and has Section 8 voucher who ask if they qualify for a mortgage because rentals are expensive and continue to rise and want to own a home instead of homeownership? Qualification with lender without discrimination. Well, I mean, the big thing is you're going to get into this area where some of the resources that your client qualifies for may actually be directly related to the disability. So that's okay. Obviously, don't do any of the things like don't assume that a person with a particular disability won't want someplace with stairs, but absolutely ask them the questions. What type of income or what types of grant programs are you getting? And then start looking at, again, community lenders that will often have programs that say, yes, that and that and that, those all get cobbled together and become part of their qualifying income. But absolutely dive into that. David, I'm not sure if the website is for the bias override. I'm not sure what we're talking about. But again, if you Google NAR bias override, you will quickly find the video, which I think they have posted on both Vimeo and on YouTube. So I think it looks like we have exhausted, let's see.
Oh, I think Tessa posted.
Oh yeah, Tessa. Thank you, Tessa.
Great. All right. I think we just about covered it. So thanks so much for your time, Matt.
Yeah,
this is a great presentation.
Thanks for most of the people that decided to hang out for the slight after hours portion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'll type in my email address in the chat box and cell phone number if anyone needs to reach me or pick up the conversation offline. There you go, in the chat box now. Thank you all so very much.
All right.
And also thank you for your patience while I got myself situated at the beginning.
Of course. Awesome. Thanks for getting the presentation out. Appreciate it.
All
right. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.